Prices jumped up in rent, and it was hard to make ends meet, so I thought I'd come down here to regroup.
People without a place to stay have been living in an encampment near downtown. Support workers are concerned about them as the weather is turning and housing is hard to come by.
Instead, it's here at home in the apartments with the cats, and it gets a little bit messy at times, but we make it work.
Gaming may be more of a solo sport, but to broadcast a tournament, still need a team. The pandemic has shrunk that into a one-person show. Our low hit the single digits of 6 degrees, but right now it's feeling about 20 outside in Windsor, Essex. Colette Kennedy is going to join us with the full forecast later tonight. I'm Chris Hensing. Thanks for watching. With winter approaching, homeless advocates are working to help people move into emergency shelters, but fears around COVID-19 are making that more difficult this year. And with colder temperatures on the way, some are especially concerned about the future of those living in an encampment in our city's core. The CBC's Katerina Georgieva has a story.
Oven mitts, pots and pans, even Halloween decorations, signs of home. And yet, no running water, no toilet facility, with only tents to protect residents from the natural elements. But this encampment, off the beaten path downtown near the river, is home to more than a dozen people.
It's like camping, you know, like there's always something to do.
Like Daryl Fournier. He's been here for a couple of months.
Prices jumped up in rent, and it was hard to make ends meet, so I thought I'd come down here to regroup and look at it from a different angle and figure it out, you know.
This man, who wanted to stay anonymous, lost his place at the start of 2018.
I've been working with all the agencies like housing, Downtown Mission, HIS, to get housing. However, the list is just so long. It's been years that I've been on the list.
So he's been here on and off for a month or two. He says it's been hard to get on his feet without a solid place to stay.
Seems like almost like an impossible uphill battle when you're out here because, I mean, just the basic things you're trying to do, like just to eat, cook, stay clean, those things are very challenging, you know? So as far as like getting ahead, without more resources, it's almost like a feeling of hopelessness, to be honest with you.
Ron Dunn is with the Downtown Mission, but he visits from time to time. And as the temperatures start to dip, he comes with a message.
It's going to get really cold. You need to get out of here. Most of the people I've spoken to have said, look, we just want a safe place at the end of the night to kick off our shoes. You know, and I think it kind of breaks my heart because that's, I think, what everybody wants, right? So housing is the answer. Shelter is a stopgap measure.
Trying to get folks to shelter and permanent housing is a top priority for outreach workers who visit the site every day.
So I would say even in July, we were talking about the winter. Our main thing is to try and encourage people to use emergency shelter in the winter time.
But for some, that's not an option.
There is definitely an added apprehension around returning to shelter because you'll be surrounded by people because of COVID.
Others are undecided.
I don't plan on being out here in the winter. To be honest with you, I don't know 100% what I'm going to do.
He says a rooming house is a possibility, but he feels his options are limited. Dunn says the folks at the encampment deserve better than this. He wants the provincial and federal governments to step in with more funding to deal with the crisis head on.
We need to do more, and we need to do it now.
Katerina joins us now live in studio. Kat, you went down to that encampment. What was it like for you? What were your impressions?
Well, Chris, I'd never really seen anything quite like it before. It's really tucked away, pretty easy to pass by if you didn't know that it was there. And it's tent after tent after tent, almost like its own little city. But I was reminded by the outreach workers and just by being there that ultimately, while it's not an ideal situation for the people down there, it's their home and they all have different reasons for being there. Family Services Windsor Essex says that right now this is the only active encampment in our city, and that's defined as more than 2 people living there.
Now, you mentioned and we heard from outreach workers that are checking in on them on a daily basis. So they're trying to make sure that they're safe, eventually get them into housing. Why is it so difficult?
Well, ultimately, there's an affordable housing shortage. Family Services is the group that's been tracking this encampment since July, and they told me it takes an average of 90 days to get someone into permanent housing. But even then, it's usually a rooming house shared with a handful of other people. So the options just aren't really great out there, and there's not enough.
And now we know we've been enjoying some unseasonably warm temperatures, but the cold's right around the corner. What happens to these people who decide they don't want to be in a shelter this winter?
Well, outreach workers are being really diligent about getting a safety plan in place for them. So whether that's trying to connect them to someone in their life who might be able to help them, or get them equipped for the cold with a coat, warm socks, things like that. But ultimately, the goal is still get them into a shelter while they wait for permanent housing.
Thanks, Ms. Katerina. The CBC's Katerina Georgieva live tonight. A shocking story out of Michigan today. The FBI says that it's arrested and charged 13 people in connection with alleged violent plots to overthrow the state government, kidnap the governor, and target other officials.
The individuals in custody are suspected to have attempted to identify the home addresses of law enforcement officers in order to target them, made threats of violence intended to instigate a civil war, and engaged in planning and training for an operation to attack the Capitol building of Michigan and to kidnap government officials, including the governor of Michigan.
This afternoon, Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer thanked law enforcement for foiling the plot to kidnap her. Her tough COVID measures have been highly criticized by right-wing groups as well as by President Donald Trump. For months, U.S. security officials have been warning about the threat posed by violent domestic extremists against election-related targets. Ontario has set another record for COVID-19 infections. The province is reporting 797 new infections today. A single new case in Windsor, Essex announced this morning, but Ontario-wide, this is the most on any single day since the outbreak started. Provincial labs also set a record with nearly 48,500 tests performed in the past 24 hours. I spoke with the federal health minister about testing, specifically how she feels Ontario is handling things.
The Premier's made some really great adjustments over the last little while to have a testing strategy in Ontario that more aligns with the national guidance for how to conduct testing. Listen, I think it was admirable that he wanted to test everybody all the time, but in fact, the guidance indicates all around the world that your strategy actually has to test the right people at the right time in the right place. And so these refinements will help reduce the burden that he's seeing in his labs, amongst the healthcare workers that are processing those samples.
And we'll have more of our one-on-one interview with the minister coming up in just a few minutes. COVID-19 devastated long-term care homes in Ontario, and we're learning tonight from an ombudsman report that complaints about these facilities shot up in the first few months of the pandemic, and there are concerns. Many of the problems still haven't been addressed. Lorenda Redikoff has the details.
Maureen McDermott's 93-year-old mom, Elsie, survived a case of COVID-19 in May. She's not surprised by today's findings.
They were in their rooms for over 100 days. That can't happen again. It absolutely can't. I won't watch my mom die of a broken heart through a dirty window again.
Complaints about visitation are included in today's report, detailing problems flagged by families, residents, and staff. Hundreds of complaints over a few months, a jump of 370%. In one case, a long-term care employee said staff were forced to work while they were COVID positive and take swabs from residents. Just one of the whistleblower complaints.
Even though they were worried about potentially losing their jobs, they were very concerned about the level of service and quality of care that they were seeing.
Today, long-term care advocates circled the Ontario legislature, calling for change.
Staffing crisis in long-term care is now worse than it was prior to COVID-19. In the homes where we're seeing larger outbreaks emerge, the staffing crisis is just beyond words.
She's heard reports about one current outbreak at Ottawa's Extendicare West End Villa. It's had 131 cases, 84 in residents, 47 among staff.
One PSW for 30 COVID positive residents. That would be impossible if the residents were healthy. That is just unspeakable.
The report makes 4 recommendations: backstops and contingency plans for all healthcare providers, such as a partnership with a hospital, visitation changes to safely allow essential caregivers, dedicated communications resources, and enhanced whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who bring forward concerns.
This report is only preliminary, and the government isn't required to follow the recommendations, but it says it is bringing in improvements.
We have been working speedily and active this whole time to an evolving, unprecedented threat.
Maureen McDermott hopes the government will pay attention. Her mom is in isolation, awaiting a test to find out if she's infected again. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
Students and faculty at the University of Windsor head into Reading Week, and they've gotten a taste of what school feels like during a pandemic. We checked in with a few students to see how this new way of learning is working for them.
So this is your university for the year, hey?
Yeah, pretty much. I sit on the kitchen island and I do my work and take my classes.
Okay, how's that going?
It's just really different. I guess my last year I anticipated having a lot of like seminars where I did discussions and got a lot of like hands-on type of experience in the field, but because of COVID, we're just doing everything virtually. And I understand your last year tends to be pretty heavy, but like it's even heavier. Like I'll have a lecture to watch and then a lecture to read through, like a 10-page lecture that's been written out by profs. So it's just doing a lot of work for yourself and self-teaching a lot.
Most courses and classes are pre-recorded.
What if you have questions and things like that?
Then you email the prof or you go to their office hours online.
I guess if you have a question to ask, then you kind of want to ask it in the moment, hey?
Exactly.
I do think for labs, it's a very different environment. So in science, teaching in labs requires hands-on learning, right? So which is why the university for the winter term is going to return to some hands-on learning, just because it is much more difficult to learn by video.
Any concerns about like mental health or things like that?
We've noticed that, right? And that can be through the stress of like, you know, the increased number of assignments and assessments now, right? That can also be the challenges of, you know, if you're still working, right? You know, how do you balance that, right? How do you balance, you know, studying when you're not in the most conducive environment? With the Peer Support Center, for example, we've had a lot of, you know, calls for that, as well as, student counseling and health services. They've had quite the spike in, student discussions as well when it comes to mental health.
Caesars Windsor opened today for the first time in 6 months, but the casino's only welcoming invited guests. Currently, there's a limit of 50 guests. Representatives from the casino wouldn't say how many people made it into the building on day one, but say the responses from those who have has been positive. An addictions counselor says due to the temporary closure, some gamblers sought help and worry about this reopening.
There's a lot of mixed reviews among our clients. So some of them who are a little bit further in their recovery process feel a little bit better about it, aren't as nervous about it, and are actually a little bit curious to see how they're going to react knowing that's an option again. Our clients who are a little bit new to recovery or just coming off of a recent relapse are a little more nervous, have a little bit more anxiety about it, understandably. And those who have just switched to online gambling are relatively unfazed that the casino is back because they found this new medium.
More people can now cross the border into Canada to visit loved ones today. It's part of the federal government's announcement last week about enhanced border measures. Extended family members are allowed to enter, and there's compassionate entries allowed on a case-by-case basis. That mandatory 14-day quarantine period, though, still in effect for those entering the country. I spoke with Canada's federal health minister, Patty Hajdu, about the changes, and she also described how the way migrant workers at some farms are treated as a national disgrace this summer. So I started off by asking her what the government's doing to fix that.
Well, listen, my colleague, Minister Qualtrough, is working now, as you know, on temporary foreign worker reforms. I did some of that when I was the Minister of Labour, and I can say that by and large, most farms and most industry players that use temporary foreign workers are doing so in a way that respects their obligations as employers to provide safe and sound accommodation, to respect their rights in Canada, to pay them accurately, to make sure that they're getting appropriate rest periods and the like. But there are some folks that don't. And, you know, we've seen this challenge all along with temporary foreign workers. And certainly in my time as Minister of Employment, it was one of the areas that I think was the most distressing because, as I mentioned earlier, many times these are folks with very little route to complain about the treatment they're receiving or receive support to get better access to officials that can help them with exercising those rights. And so some of the reforms that we've made, I think, for example, around around work permits and the ability to, change locations if in fact there is allegations of abuse and those kinds of situations, I think are positive changes. I think the reform needs to happen, and I want to thank all the advocacy groups that work on behalf of the temporary foreign workers in this country who continue to push for reform and to continue to give the government options in terms of how to conduct that reform.
And looking at the border there, your government has announced new measures that will help people in places like Michigan reunite with families like those here in Windsor. But what will it take to actually reopen that border?
Well, listen, we know that coronavirus is still raging around the world, and in fact, the United States has the highest growth in cases continually, still to this date. We know that reducing importations is important to all of the public health officials across Canada, certainly as we manage our own outbreaks in Ontario and Quebec predominantly, but certainly other Western provinces as well. And so we take our responsibility at the federal government level very seriously to reduce importations and to make sure that we're not adding to cases in regions that are really struggling to contain our own domestic spread. So we're continually looking at the border. We have some exciting research happening between Air Canada and McMaster that's looking at an opportunity to blend a combination of testing and reducing quarantine days. We'll be reviewing that very closely through a peer-reviewed study. We've got other potential research lined up with other provinces. But at the end of the day, right now, the most effective measure to reduce importation is the 14-day quarantine that all people have to undergo unless they're essential workers, as you know, which is also critical to our economy.
I also asked her about the backlog of tests here in Ontario and what the winter is going to look like for our country. The full interview is going to be posted online later tonight. We'll take another look outside, enjoying this final blast of warmth. We are going to ask Colette Kennedy if that sun's going to stick around. She was talking about rain on Thanksgiving. We'll see if that's still in the forecast next. And joining us now for a live look at the weather is Colette Kennedy. Colette, I went out to Malden Park yesterday and I watched the sunset right after the show, and I found nothing but people enjoying that last little heat wave without jackets, t-shirts. I think I saw someone in shorts. They're enjoying it, maybe a little irresponsibly, but we're having fun with some of that warm weather.
Yes, I'm glad, and I hope people can do it responsibly because we have a few more days yet, so it's not over with, and I'm really glad that, try and soak up some of the sunshine and these warmer temperatures that we have. We've got a few more days yet. Something I do want to point out, though, is that overnight tonight, a little bit of fog developing. We've got kind of the conditions for it, at least in certain areas you could be seeing some of this. So just know some of that, as it does, may linger into tomorrow morning before we can see that burning off, and so a little bit of reduced visibility. Be aware, but otherwise we are going to see a lot of sunshine and the warm conditions prevail, and warm again tomorrow, but even warmer as we step into Saturday. Now, we still have the shower risk into Monday, but there is an area before that where we may see a little precipitation, so I'll show you what spot I'm thinking of for that. Current temperatures, they are looking like this. Unofficially 21 today, but that's kind of rounding it up, so we're still close to where our daytime high was. Slightly cooler there at Chatham-Kent, and seeing where there was a little disturbance, but luckily it was off to the north and east, so that's what some of those showers you're seeing off on the radar are associated with. Wind's not a factor at the moment, but I do want to show you, I'm kind of going to be winding this through into Friday, but into Saturday as well. So going to pause it right here. This is into tomorrow afternoon. You can see the southerly flow, so that's one thing that's important in terms of the warmth, the direction coming in here, but also of note, just to know the direction coming in off of the lake. For some of you, we always have to be concerned about that, but certainly when they start to pick up as we go Friday night into Saturday. So there are going to be some very gusty winds coming in from the south, but again, that's what's really going to be pushing the temperature up as we go into Saturday, and why it's going to be so extreme as that front comes through. Once it passes, the temperatures go not extreme, but they go down a few degrees as we go into Sunday. There it is. As that front goes through, could have a chance of a few sprinkles there through Saturday. So it's a slim chance that with some of that warmth, we get some showers there. Tonight, though, with the fog, some cooler temperatures that we will be seeing. Tomorrow afternoon, have a look at some of these readings. And then Saturday, they get even better. Slightly cooler air. It will feel it after Saturday, but into Monday, that's when we have the greatest chance of seeing some wet conditions coming back at us, and it does happen to be the holiday Monday.
That's part of it. But look at what's surrounding it, right? We're doing pretty good with those temperatures.
Another couple nice days.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
Coming up next, a big investment from the provincial and federal governments for a Ford plant in Ontario. The Oakville Ford plant will soon be a production hub for electric vehicles. Both the federal and provincial governments are investing $295 million each in the Ford Motor Company.
This is just one of the first steps to build a next-generation auto industry. And we have the resources to do that. From aluminum from Quebec to nickel from Ontario, this investment will make a huge impact throughout the supply chain.
The upgrade of the Oakville plant will make it Ford's #1 electric vehicle factory in North America. As varsity sports across the region are put on hold due to the ongoing pandemic, it's no surprise that esports have been able to continue. But as St. Clair College, it's the esports team that's having to change things up to ensure that their broadcasts can run smoothly. As the CBC's Sanjay Maru reports, the work of a multi-person production team now being done by just one person.
My name is Dan Banner, going to be your host here for this grand final.
This year, he's the proverbial voice of Saints Gaming, but he's also doing much more than that.
I've soloed a good handful of times already this semester, and it's gone well overall. It's just a lot to keep track of.
This is how Saints Gaming would put their productions together before COVID-19. Now, it's all happening out of Banner's living room, a one-man production team, switching camera angles, monitoring sound levels, ensuring online streams are running smoothly, and in most cases, doing commentary all at the same time, all on his own.
I can't get somebody from online to monitor the audio for me or to switch the scenes for me or anything like that on a moment's notice. So that can be rough, that's for sure.
Esports have seen a surge in popularity since the pandemic started, continuing at a time when other professional sports were put on hold.
There's a little bit of pride to it. Like, I'm very thankful for the opportunity and happy about it, knowing that more and more people are learning about the program or getting into esports because of something that I am putting together.
Despite a late start to the college semester, Saints Gaming says it's experiencing one of its better months in terms of viewership from around the world as more people turn to esports as a form of entertainment. And though Banner's in-game objective may be different from the actual players,
towards the shot, centers it, and it's going to be put into the net. Fusion picking up his second goal of the game.
He says his role of keeping the spirit of esports alive is a challenge he's more than happy to meet. Sanjay Maru, CBC News, Windsor.
A U.S. poet who has already taken home almost every literary honor there is now has one more international accolade to add.
The Nobel Prize in Literature for 2020 is awarded to the American poet Louise Glück for her unmistakable poetic voice.
Glück got the call from Sweden early this morning at her home in Massachusetts. Since her debut in 1968, she's written more than a dozen books of poetry and essays. She's won a Pulitzer Prize and also been named U.S. Poet Laureate. It's 6:29 p.m. and that's it for us here at CBC Windsor News. Don't forget, for news anytime, you can go to our website, cbc.ca/Windsor. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Power and Politics is up next. We're going to join that already in progress. Thanks for watching. Make sure you and your family have a wonderful night tonight.